Okay, I just need to stand here.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Happy, John?
All right, everybody. Where's my hey? I need somebody to ring a bell or something. Yeah, let's get started here. We're running a little bit late. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. Anyway, thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. And thanks for those watching online. If to the ones watching online, if you have questions, make sure you put it in the chat box. I'd like to thank everybody who brought goodies tonight, all the good food here. And if you're interested in bringing food to our next meeting, there's a sign-up sheet over here. Put your name on there, and our hospitality hostess, Jean, will get a hold of you. And yeah. Okay, I have just a few announcements, and then we'll get to our guest speaker, Gary Ziegler. Saturday, February 21st, our February field trip will be a tour of selected historic churches here in Pueblo. We'll be hearing the history of these churches and viewing their unique architecture. There's more information on some flyers at the table back here. And also, too, if you're interested, you can talk to me. And but don't tell me you want to go tonight because I'll forget. You'll have to email me tomorrow. Yeah. That is February 21st, and the tour will start in the morning. We'll tour one church in the morning. We'll have brunch at 11 o'clock at Shamrock. And then after that, we have 4 more churches in the afternoon. And somebody's raising their hand back there. Oh, well. Okay. Also, I want to hold up this book. And I'm sorry for all you that didn't join our book discussion group this month. We discussed the book Antonia. I always said Antonia, it's Antonia. But anyway, we had a great discussion, great book. But next, in March, our book discussion, I don't have the book, will be Witness at Sand Creek, The Life and Letters of Silas Soule. And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with Sand Creek and what happened there. This book brings to life the story of Captain Silas Soule, a young abolitionist turned Union officer who refused to obey orders during the Sand Creek Massacre of 1864. Rather than participate in the slaughter of peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho families, Soule defied his superiors and later testified to what happened. His act of conscience would make him a target, and he was assassinated just months later. Anyway, you have plenty of time to get that book and read it, and join us in our lively book discussions. And that is a Zoom discussion too. So you really don't have an excuse not to join us. It's dinner time for, yeah. Anyway, our next speaker, our March speaker, March 5th, right here at 7 o'clock, will be Elizabeth Dodd. Elizabeth's subject will be War and Calamity in 1847. After many years of successfully trading in the Mexican-American borderlands, the owners of Bent and St. Vrain and Company were struck by a series of misfortunes in 1847 that drove them out of business and forever changed life on the Southern Plains. Beth Dodd will present this program about the downfall of the original Bent's Fort. Beth is a historian and naturalist employed at the Bent's Fort National Historic Site. She's been an educator at parks, nature centers, and museums around the country. And again, that's Thursday, March 5th. And I watched one of our best presentation on this. It was online, and it's really a good presentation. You don't want to miss that. And again, that's March 5th. All this info I'm giving you is in the midden. So make sure you're watching your midden and email blasts. If you're not getting our emails or the midden, make sure you're signing up for the midden on this back table back here. There's a sign-up sheet. What else do I have here? Oh, I think I think I'm going to introduce our speaker now. I would now like to introduce tonight's speaker, Gary Ziegler. And this is quite a bio. This guy's been around the block. So anyway, Gary is a Colorado Springs native and graduate of Colorado College. He's a field archaeologist with a geology background. He's a mountaineer and explorer who has spent a lifetime finding and documenting remote Inca sites in the Vucabamba range of Peru's southern Andes. He has climbed 14 Andean peaks above 20,000 feet and has made first ascents of 7 over 18,000 feet. Along the way, Gary served as a combat tour with the Army Special Operations in Vietnam, leaving as captain. He briefly staffed for the Peace Corps and worked as program director and instructor for Colorado Outward Bound. Gary is a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and the Explorers Club. He has been featured in documentary films for National Geographic, the BBC, Discovery Channel, Science and History channels. In 2013, he was awarded the title Distinguished Lecturer at NASA's Marshall Space Center. He is published in numerous professional journals and is co-author of Machu Picchu Sacred Sisters. And I'm going to need help here again.
Yaktapata.
Say it again.
Yaktapata.
Yaktapata and
Choki Karal.
Choki Karal. I won't ever have to say those again, so I'll leave it at that. And with the University of Colorado archaeoastronomer Kim Malville. Gary has taught at Colorado College and Peru's National University, San Marcos. His home base is the 4,000-acre Bear Basin Ranch in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in Custer County, where he is former county sheriff and founder of the Search and Rescue Unit. He was recently director of the Pikes Peak Range Riders, dedicated to preserving Colorado's Western heritage, and the Pikes Peak or Bus Charity Rodeo. He is currently director of the Andean Research Project, conducting ongoing field research on Inca sites associated with Machu Picchu, and I guess I will have to say this again. Chocaquero, something like that. He'll tell you.
Choka Corral.
Chocaquero. Okay. Please welcome Gary Ziegler.
Thank you, Doug. Of course, that's all made up. Well, this is a little bit of a change for me because the last presentation I've been doing has been on local history. And I was sort of thinking I'd do one for you tonight, but Doug said, no, they want to hear about Machu Picchu. So I'm going to give you what I can about the sites in Peru. And it's a long, long time. I'm going to hit the highlights. So anyway, moving ahead here, let's see if technologically it works. So I wanted to start this off with saying that I'm a member of a strange group of archaeologists. Archaeologists in general, and particularly in Peru, where there are so many coastal sites and accessible sites, spend their lifetime studying and driving to these sites. Well, there's a handful of us who are basically old climbers and skiers. I grew up climbing and skiing in Colorado, and we wanted to do extreme adventurous stuff. So we started doing these high altitude sites. And fortunately for us, the Inca built these wonderful ceremonial sites on top of mountains. And I'm just going to run through this little list of people on the side. Vince and Nancy Lee. Unfortunately, Vince just died last year, but he was one of the primary explorers of this wild area called Vilcabamba, the last refuge of the Inca. He was a Princeton trained architect, but beyond that, he was a guide in the Tetons and an old climbing friend. And he moved to Cortez, Colorado not too long ago and was doing some things with the Ute. Really interesting stuff. And he published a book called Forgotten Vilcabamba. And he was one of my colleagues and inspiration these years back. Another one, he's probably the only one you've heard of, is Johann Reinhardt. And he's famous because he discovered the ice mummy on top of a mountain in Peru. Well, interesting story. And he's an old climber and an old climbing guide, as well as being a trained archaeologist. And when he discovered Juanita, it was what the mummy was named. When he discovered that, he was just scheduled to go with me to Choqquequirao and said, no, I'm going to go climb this peak in southern Peru. So he climbed this peak, and lo and behold, there was some melting, and here was the mummified remains on top of the peak. And that started his whole career of finding these mummies and peaks in Bolivia and Chile and on. And he's highly published in National Geographic. I'm sure most of you have heard of him. Kim Malville's my co-author, a good friend. He's an old climbing guide from Colorado too. He also worked for Colorado Outward Bound years ago, and he's now professor emeritus from CU, and he's an astrophysicist. So he's the one who brought me into astronomy, raised me up from just a terrestrial guy looking at the ground. So now I look at the skies as well. So, and then Ken and Ruth Wright, you probably haven't heard of them. They have Wright Water Engineers in Denver, and they did a definitive study on the irrigation systems at Chaco Canyon with Kim Melville and others. And in Peru, they literally opened up the water system of Machu Picchu. So they spent years working there, published some wonderful material. Edward Duenas is my research associate in Peru. So he runs the whole program and all of our logistics there. And then Hugh Thompson is my co-expedition partner. He's a specialist in archaeology. He was a graduate from Cambridge in archaeology, did some early works in Peru, and he's also a noted BBC producer and filmmaker and writer. And he was my co-director on several expeditions that I'll run through. Anyway, enough of that history. Well, I have to throw a little bit of my personal history on you to show you how all this led up to the archaeology. And it's things that happened to me in Colorado that probably set the stage for me being able to do this. When I was at Colorado College, the Peace Corps was just starting up a training camp, and it was actually the first outward bound experience in the United States. And I was hired to help set up a jungle survival and climbing camp in Puerto Rico to train groups going to South America. So that's way back, 1962. Anyway, a part of this was at the end of this job, I was allowed to travel to Colombia and Ecuador doing project evaluations and all before I returned back to Colorado College, finished my degree there. And just a little background about what happened after that, how I got back to Peru. Well, this is a letter. Bob Orms was one of my mentors and professors. He was famous early Colorado climber as well. He was his wife was Albert Ellingwood, famous Colorado mountain climber. Was his wife was the daughter of him. Here's a picture of us just getting started. We did a lot of climbing when I grew up in Colorado Springs, and the Colorado College Mountain Club was really active. Here we are skiing Mount Quandary. But anyway, I show this letter because it was through Bob Orms and the American Alpine Club that I was able to put an expedition to go to Peru just when I graduated from Colorado College to go climbing and skiing, not archaeology. As it turns out, there was no anthro department at Colorado College at the time. And so I had 4 years of geology, wonderful education with Richard Pearl was my student advisor, and great Colorado mineralogist. So I had my choice of graduating from Colorado College with a degree in geology, and I didn't take it because in my senior year, they said, well, geez, you failed, you didn't take organic chemistry. I said, no, I didn't. No, I'm not taking organic chemistry. And I had enough classes in the philosophy department. So I ended up with a BA of all things in philosophy. All right. Anyway, so a group of us put together this climbing expedition, and we traveled overland from Colorado all the way to Peru, filming and climbing. And while there, we did a number of ascents and things. And I met some people at the university there after we were through climbing. And about this time, I had just one of my events at Colorado College was I had just gotten a commission as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, having gone through ROTC. And if I went to graduate school, I didn't have to go on active duty. So there I went. So I stayed in Peru several years and went through their graduation or their grad department. And it was actually a wonderful experience. San Marcos University is the oldest university in the Americas, 1 year older than the University of Mexico. But anyway, I went through their program, and it was the world's experts on particularly the Inca and others. So it was a great education. And this is some of the early work. We were doing excavation along the coast of Peru, where you could walk and drive to by then. And also put together a really distant expedition into the remote Vilcabamba. At that time, there was a controversy going on about where was the last refuge of the Inca, and what was the last city of the Inca? Was it Machu Picchu? Da da da. So I put together this expedition sponsored by the university, and I was also working as a photographer for El Comercio, the local newspaper. Oh, so that's how I went off, got started on this whole remote stuff. And this is our first expedition. That's our letter, and then the local headlines. Expedition leaves today from Cusco, and Vilcabamba is protected by hostile Indians. And the photograph, I have to tell you this little footnote. See the lead guy in that photo, that's National Police. And it's a long story I won't go into. But that is Jorge Moreau, who was head of the journalism and photography department at El Comercio, and basically my boss. And we put together this expedition. And I got a phone call and a message from him 2 days ago.
Wow.
It's been 60 some years. So it just happened. It's amazing how these things come around. And there's some of the pictures from that. That's a later picture of the site of Vicos, a really major Inca ceremonial site and royal palace. And that's actually the pictures a bit later. I'm trying to do this in a chronological organization. And the other picture is me with state-of-the-art 16 millimeter Bolex camera at Machu Picchu in 1964. And then crossing a bridge at one of these remote sites. Anyway, interruptions. So finally, right in the middle of my doctoral dissertation, the Army says, you have to come on active duty. There's enough of it stuff. So I spent a year in Vietnam and a lot of other time doing a lot of things with the Army. So that's me with the Australian Army, Australian Special Air Service calls their special forces. And that's another long story that for another time. And then coming back to Colorado, I was burned out after the combat tour, and I went to work for Outward Bound, running programs. Basically, we were doing what we called Hoods in the Woods programs, where we would go out for days with a mix of young folks who were being held by a court and said, you don't have to go to jail if you go to our Outward Bound course. So we ran these courses in the mountains and all. And then eventually I bought the first 350 acres of my ranch, which is basically at mile marker 11 on Colorado 96 going to Westcliff, and dropped out of archaeology for almost a decade. And during that time, I got heavily involved with local stuff. So I became the regional East Hills deputy for our antique sheriff's department. And gradually, the sheriff died in office, and I like to say I was the only deputy who could read and write. But that may be a stretch. But anyway, the county commissioners then appointed me sheriff. So then I served as sheriff until the next election, which was a year and a half or 2 years. And then I went back to developing outdoor recreational programs and outdoor education, still working with bringing groups from Colorado College, and we were doing geology field camps and various studies at the ranch. I stayed active with the emergency services in Custer County. That's me in what did it say, 2007 or something, where I actually trained a mounted unit for the sheriff's department, trained it with the Pueblo Police Department of all places. So we learned crowd control in Pueblo on horseback. So anyway, moving on, let's get into the essence of the program. I want to run through the cultural evolution of the Americas, which leads up to our time here. Well, for years and years and years, we thought that the oldest site in the Americas was in southern Chile, and probably we thought the first human visitors came through here, maybe 17,000 years ago, and that's still kind of the trend, but there's a lot more evidence to counter that. Well, here was what was considered when I was studying the oldest site in the Americas, Monteverde, Chile, way back on the coast of Chile. That went way back until last year. And just this recent studies of a place called Santa Elena Cave Site in Brazil are human artifacts which date back to 27,000 years back. So that moves the whole history of the occupation of the Americas much further back. Anyway, basically what we saw for all those centuries, thousands of years, was basically a hunter-gatherer culture of small clans and tribal units migrating back and forth across the Americas. And there's been a lot of stuff done recently, and I'm sort of out of the loop on the new stuff on DNA studies and all that. But it's changed a lot of concepts. But anyway, the first major civilization or civil development in South America, and as it turns out, North America too, was the site of Corral. And this site was explored and has been studied extensively by another friend of mine, Bruce Shady, who's still the archaeologist in charge of this whole thing. And it was a complicated site, and there must have been more before it, and we haven't found it. But anyway, this is on the central coast of Peru, not far from Lima. You can see the map there, and that lasted for quite a while. And what this did, this set the stage for what I call for cultural evolutions. There would be a period of a rise of a state for a period of time, and then there would be a catastrophe or a crisis, and whether it was exceeding the resources or more likely something like a catastrophic weather event, an extreme drought for several hundred years, and a combination of these factors. And then there would be a period of dark ages. But yet the traditions and the technology seemed to live on, even though the culture and the civilization was gone. And then there would be another rise of another civilization. And each one was a little more expansive than the one before it, leading up to the Inca. We'll get to the Incas in a minute here. So here was the next one, Chavin culture. And this was an interesting place. It was a central highlands culture, quite high in altitude. And it dominated quite a large area of Peru. And you can see the map there. And some famous American archaeologists worked there. Wendell Bennett, I think, was the one who was most noted there. And then moving ahead even further, the next major cultural expansion, and I'm missing dozens of these things. I'm just hitting the highlights. The Moche, which is up the north coast of Peru. And then they probably fell apart because of catastrophic weather, extreme drought. And then here's the other major one, the Nazca culture, and you'll have heard about the Nazca lines, these immense what we call geoglyphs. And there's all kinds of discussion exactly what these things mean. But it turns out that there are a number of these around Peru, just not this profusion of them. But there are numerous studies pointing in that they align with celestial alignments or water sources or other sacred items. And then finally, the predecessors to the Inca were the Wari Tiwanaku group. This is an interesting thing because these were two separate cultural expansions. There were the Wari to the north and Tiwanaku to the south around Lake Titicaca and into Bolivia. And Tiwanaku was most noted for its exceptional stone masonry. And it's interesting that this tradition lived on with the Incas, and they actually imported some stonemasons from the area who still knew how to do this technique of carving stone. So, and finally, here we are. Tiwanaku, the Inca Empire. Well, but there's a dark age after Tiwanaku. Wari culture fell about 800 present time, and then the whole area for several hundred years fell into small poieties, city-states, chiefdoms, clans, whatnot. And one of these little small clans are somewhere around Titicaca were the Inca. And they, for some reason or other, rose above all the rest. They were supreme organizers and put together some incredible organized state. Here's just a quick history of what they accomplished. So 10 million inhabitants, 40,000 kilometers of road. They stretch from central Chile to southern Colombia. Amazing. And then it all ended in about 1527 before the Spanish got there. This is a little known fact in popular history, is that the Spanish arrived, the Pizarro brothers, and I'll call them Spanish because they were Europeans. There were Italians, there were Greeks, you name it, but it was primarily Spanish led by the Pizarros. There are three Pizarro brothers. Anyway, they arrived in actually about 1527 off the coast of Ecuador, and they captured an Inca raft, and they took it back to Spain, and they were able to use the people off this raft as interpreters. So when they came back to Peru, they actually had somebody who could speak the language and knew something about the culture. That's a really interesting fact. But anyway, before all this happened, the common concept is that the Inca Empire was destroyed by smallpox, and that's highly improbable. And that there is a hemorrhagic disease still going around Peru called Bartonellosis, and it looks very similar to smallpox. And after this is before Pizarro got there, probably half of the population of the Andes was wiped out. It was carried by fleas, and it came from Ecuador basically. And the Inca had just recently expanded into Ecuador, and they're building their second capital there. And the Inca emperor died. Huáscar was the emperor at the time, died, and the Inca fell into civil wars. And when the Europeans arrived, the country was desecrated by disease and civil war. And then going to the next slide here. Just a quick note about Pizarros and the Spanish. They had already conquered Mexico. Mexico fell in 1519, 1520. And I think Ponce de Leon had landed in Florida in like 1512. and Balboa had landed in Panama at about the same time period. So stepping ahead with the story here. So Atahualpa, who was one of the sons of the emperor who had just died and was probably the winner of the Civil War at the time, was camped, just happened to be camped at Cajamarca, a big site up from the coast in northern Peru when the Spanish arrived. And he allowed this 180 Spanish or 180 Europeans to arrive to his site. And he could have dispatched them, let them come through all these passes and all. And they set up camp, and he set them up in the center of a temple in Cajamarca. And then the Spanish said, geez, we're finished. We've got to do something. We can't get out of here. So they lured Atahualpa into this central plaza temple and then captured him. And this is beyond myth. This is probably fact. Is that they held Atahualpa hostage, with him still controlling the empire, what remained of it as the Inca emperor, and asked that he would be released if they could fill a room with gold. So this room still exists in Cajamarca. It's an interesting archaeological site. So yes, they filled the room with gold from all over, from Cusco and whatnot. And then they executed Atahualpa. So, and at that point, they marched on, eventually captured Cusco, and it's a long, long story. And set up a puppet Inca, Manco Inca, was the ruling Inca under European control in 1536. And after 2 or 3 years or so, he was a very clever guy, and he planned a revolution and almost overthrew the Europeans. Hundreds and hundreds were killed. And they almost, at that point, the capital Lima had already been established, and they almost were able to overthrow Lima. So it was a major revolt, and it went along for a long time. Juan Pizarro was killed, and there were other incidents. It's a long, complicated story worth reading sometime. But eventually, they were forced into this wild area called Vilcabamba, which is where my studies focus on. I'm going to go to that next. So they were pushed back into Vilcabamba, and they held out there till 1572. And this is this area of Vilcabamba, 1536, 1572. So Manco eventually was killed, and Tita Cusi and Tupac Amaru were the last Inca. And Tupac Amaru was eventually captured at this place called Espiritu Pampa in 1572. And that was the end of the Inca. Anyway, the archaeological mystery is, where were all these sites? Because they had been lost. Like Machu Picchu was never identified, and it probably was not identified because it had already been abandoned before the Europeans got there. There's a process of where the kinship group of the ruling Inca then owned the property of the Inca. It didn't become state property. And at this point, with disease and all this hitting, it was just abandoned. Nobody could support it. And it had no real economic value. It was a very important ceremonial site, which I'll get to here soon. Well, anyway, getting back to my involvement in this sort of thing, got through the early 1970s and started doing some work again, going back and forth to Peru in the late 1970s. And I produced this book. This is my first book, Beyond Machu Picchu, Explorations and Adventure in Peru's Remote Vilcabamba. And that photograph is actually taken on an Inca road, carved out of a cliff. There's some more interesting pictures. The lady sitting on the stone at the top of the picture is actually a friend who lives in Webb, Joan Hamilton, and she's been busy with the Good Night Barn group and all. So, and she has Babcock Hole Ranch and Trinity Ranch at Westcliff. No, I've been leaping ahead, so I finally got through all of my commitments and adventures and things going on in Peru. Had built the ranch up into a fairly interesting development. We're running guided climbing and all kinds of guided trips and in the Sangre de Cristos, as well as educational trips going on. And I put together this new expeditions thing, which we call the Peruvian Andean Research Project with some friends. That's John Levers from Australia, me in the center, and my British partner from Royal Geographical Society I mentioned about, Hugh Thompson. And this started a bunch of wonderful, wonderful things that we were able to do. And again, it was all extreme high altitude stuff. Here we are. This is a site I call Victoria's Secret. It actually had another name. It was the peak was called Cerro Victoria. We put together an expedition there. This was one of the big money expeditions, which don't happen anymore. National Geographic threw a bunch of money at us, and they threw in a film team, which we tried to ignore because they wanted to film and we wanted to do scientific research. So, but anyway, so that's a picture. I'm examining a potsherd at it from turns out a looted burial tomb. So much has been looted in Peru. Here's some more pictures of. We actually excavated there, which is we rarely do. We've done no excavation in years because basically the Inca were only there for a short period of time. It's not civilization built on civilization like the Middle East or somewhere. And so these sites are all quite late. And there may be some earlier stuff of some primitive group, but basically these ceremonial sites were built by the Inca quite late. And what we look at is how the sites are designed. How do they face? What do they look at the Pleiades? Do they look at the solstice? Do they look at another sacred mountain plus all of this? So it was more an interpretation thing. We would clear these things and then diagram them to determine how they fit into the whole picture there. So you see me in the bottom corner there, and I'm using probably a Brunton compass. This is before the days of this is now everybody does all this stuff by drones and super instruments, which we didn't have. And this is one of our really significant discoveries. We found the Inca road that continued on from Machu Picchu in a deep canyon, and it finally arrived at this other major ceremonial site, which I call a replica of Machu Picchu, Choqquequirao, and it followed this deep, deep canyon. And these were tremendous adventures just to travel down with, and we'd have a whole crew of locals with us with machetes and clearing trail. Anyway, this is a diagram of the site we found there. And as it turned out later, we interpreted it to not only the continuation of the Inca Road, but this was a big tambo or way station where they stored coca leaves and the corrals were for pack llamas. The Choqquequirao was a ceremonial growing area for coca. And just a little flashback to Colorado College Bulletin. So I made the front page. It wasn't the Rolling Stone, but best I could do. And there's a clip from an article in the Los Angeles Times. Yeah. Well, then probably the apex of my archaeological career was our work at Yactapata. And a quick background on Yactapata. Yactapata was actually discovered by Hiram Bingham in 1915 when one of his major sorties out from Machu Picchu. He was looking for other sites, and he found a small Inca site, which he said was Oh, I found the home of a Inca chieftain, and then he spent 4 hours there and went on. And what we discovered, and I have to go back to my partner Hugh Thompson, who was rewriting. He was editing and doing a new edition of Hiram Bingham's book, Lost City of the Incas, and he had access to the Yale archives and all that. So he got some of Hiram Bingham's original unpublished notes that we used. And they said there's got to be a lot more there, and we tried to follow Bingham's descriptions, and it took a lot of work, but we finally did. And what we found was something about 15 times larger than Hiram Bingham had found, and it was a major support site to 2 miles from Machu Picchu. We put together, this was probably the last of the great expeditions. The Royal Geographical Society sponsored this one. And we brought in some incredible experts. The fellow in the center there, Tom Zeideman, I consider him that he was the world's expert on the Inca. And unfortunately, he died just recently too. He was a Dutch archaeologist, and he was teaching at the University of Illinois for a while, and lived in Peru for years, and did endless studies. Everybody quotes him. So we were able to bring him on our project. And that's Kim Malville from the University of Colorado working in our bent there. So it was a multi-discipline expedition. We looked at every aspect of it. And this is one of the maps we put together showing the network of sites and roads. And it's one of the small buildings there in the center. I'm just hitting the highlights of this. This is a view from Machu Picchu, a diagram of this immense site. And what it is, it wasn't one clustered group like Machu Picchu. What it was a huge area of five. We just designated 5 different sectors, and they were all up. They were 1,000 feet of altitude apart. So it was really interesting. And we found the Inca Trail, which continued from Machu Picchu on. Here's another look at the map. And what we found is that all these sites were all aligned with what I call geocosmic alignments, along with sacred mountains and rivers and the particularly the 2 solstices and the equinox. And here's the view from Yantapata back to Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is in that cloud bank with a little point there. That's Huayna Picchu left, the big peak associated with Machu Picchu if you've been there, and the point of sunrise. And this is very significant. What we found is one of these buildings, and you see Hugh and I clearing it, was an exact comparison to the Sun Temple in Cusco, and the alignments were all the same. The rooms were even the same, and all aligned at the June solstice. We worked there a couple of years. We went back and forth. There's working with local archaeologists, and there's Tom Zeidema there with us. And we continue doing other research in the area, which we're still doing. Okay, well, this is, again, another general map, and it's hard to fathom just sitting in a chair looking at this, but what it shows is that Machu Picchu was sort of the ceremonial hub of this huge area. And there were all these various trails and routes leading into it. And also, as a ceremonial center, it was probably a location for state-sponsored pilgrimages. So the state would sponsor then during the December solstice was the most important date for the Inca. And there would be sponsored a group of Inca priests and all on the road would go to Machu Picchu for ceremonies at Machu Picchu. And then there was a continuation of these to other sites related to Yantapata and onward. Anyway, it's a very, very complicated thing. Is what I wrote about it. So everything was alive for the Inca. And I say the Inca, the Inca were the inheritors of all of these beliefs and traditions and cultures before them. So it wasn't something that they just popped up with. They were simply the inheritors of this. So everything was alive, the stones, the trees, the rivers, and particularly important were sacred mountains and sacred rivers. Here's a photo, one of my photos from high up looking at Machu Picchu. That would all be done by drone today. Anyway, that shows Machu Picchu with all cleared and reconstructed and whatnot. If I took that picture today, there would be 1,000 tourists in the middle. So, and just some views around Machu Picchu of interest. The lower left-hand photo is the Cave of the Moon, and no one goes there. Tourists aren't allowed now to go anywhere in Machu Picchu except a little canned route with the official guide. So no one will actually see these sites anymore. But the Cave of the Moon is fantastic. Look at the stone masonry built into the cave, and it just happens to face a mountain shrine on the other side of the Urubamba River, which happens to be the June solstice sunrise point. So, and then here's the lower right-hand picture is the first view coming into Machu Picchu from the quote Inca Trail, and the gate focuses on Huayna Picchu, and we concluded that Huayna Picchu was the principal deity of Machu Picchu, and much of Machu Picchu is aligned or to replicate it. And the other one, the two on the top, the one on the right, the semicircular one, is called a Torreon, and that was studied years ago by an American team, and the center stone and the altar stone in the middle is illuminated by the December solstice sunrise through a window, and it has a wonderful cave below it, which is called the Royal Mausoleum, and it may be because the Pachacuti, the Inca emperor who built Machu Picchu, probably had it. It was his mausoleum. Not that his body was left there. His body was embalmed and left in Cusco, but he would have had a replica mummy called a Waiki, which would be there entombed there and brought out on special ceremonies. And here's a view of one of the most important monuments in Machu Picchu. This is the Intihuatana stone, and the June solstice sunrise lighting up the stone. And the stone is two things. One, it casts a shadow on several important objects, and two, from a certain angle, it replicates Machu Picchu. And here's looking back at Yatapata. And there's this particular stone in a set-aside platform, a round platform, and it's an exact replica of the ridge of like Machu Picchu, or rather, try that again, of Yactapata in the background, 2 miles away. Here's another interesting thing. Brian Bauer and American archaeologists and Tom Zeidema did an intense study of these what's called Seke lines in Cusco, which were ceremonial lines that radiated out from the official Sun Temple, and there were stone markers on the horizon, and they were used both as a calendar and for special ceremonies of special times of the year. Well, we found this stone at Machu Picchu in one of the remote areas that hadn't been cleared, which essentially represents what we think are the same thing at Machu Picchu. And we measured the angles of these lines, and they go to like one of the sacred mountain peaks, or Salcantay, the big ice peak, or other directions. So there's so much to be done there, and it's not being done. And we did a number of interesting films there. There's a couple I worked with. Lane Stewart did a special on the geology of Machu Picchu. He's a BBC producer. That was really neat. And then I did a special with Josh Bernstein on the History Channel on a program he was doing called Digging for the Truth. I have to throw oyster in a little bit of humor on it. It was terribly cold when we were filming there, and he has a Scottish accent. This is the days two of big film crews. The last film I made in Peru, there was there were three of us. There was the guy who carried all the gear, the grip, and a cameraman, and the woman who was the producer director, and me as the presenter, and we all ended up interchanging, and so low budget is what it's gone to now. No more big films. Anyway, continuing on now, I just want to run a little bit past Choki Crawl and what we're doing now, and let you have a break for questions. So going back to about 30 air miles away from Machu Picchu is Choki Corral. We've been working there now for many, many years, corresponding to the same time with Machu Picchu. And it's a fantastic site. And we have suggested, we firmly believe that Choki Corral was built by the son of the last Inca, Pachacute, who built Machu Picchu. And this was built as a replica of Machu Picchu. And here it is. This is the Upper Rimac Canyon below. And to get there, it's really interesting. It's like crossing the Grand Canyon. You've got to go 5,000 feet down and then 5,000 feet back up to, and Choki Corral sits on this mountain ridge with ice peaks in the background. Fantastic place. Another picture of it from one of our camps. We've done considerable investigation and work on sites around here too. And each one, it takes a week of work to get to one of these sites, and then have to have a whole crew of people with machetes and whatnot to clear it, just so we can get an idea what's there and diagram it. So this is the central plaza of Choki Corral. And we have pretty much over the years, we've investigated everything. It's pretty much cleared. We did some experimental stuff. We rented a plane. We flew infrared photography over, trying to find more stuff. We did find some stuff, but LIDAR, which is a state of the art for finding things like in Central America and fairly flat terrain, doesn't work in this really steep. There's too much altitude differentiation. So anyway, here's this remarkable site now, pretty much all reconstructed. And if you ever want to go there, I really recommend this. Very few people go there, because you have to do this trek. It's at minimum 2 days there, crossing the Grand Canyon there, and 2 days back crossing the Grand Canyon. So, but if you get there, there might be 5 tourists. So, and then just some views around some things that we located. We found this little group right here called the Warincancha lower group. Warin means low. And some stuff, Inca period, late Inca period plate. And the most exciting thing was the stone wall. We didn't find this, but my friend who was the head archaeologist there put this team together and worked there for years. So here are these stone yamas in a wall, and vertical stonework, which is not typical of the Inca. We think this was done by a northern Peru group called the Chachapoyas, who were basically assimilated by the Inca just before the Europeans got there. All kinds of little mysteries. Now we're really leaping up to modern times. This is like, it's like 2018 or 19 or so. So that's me in the center and 3 friends of mine. The 2 guys in the photo, I was just in Antigua last week on a sailboat. So.
Sorry.
Anyway, just some of the modern work. This is what we produce. Are these diagrams and notes, and sometimes we publish professionally, sometimes write an article about it. So. Some other things close to the area that are really worth looking at. Here's the solstice seat facing the December solstice. Here's a fantastic stone masonry inside a cave. And here is one of these fantastically carved rocks. And so, and here's a hilltop shrine out in the middle of nowhere, about not very high, about 15,000 feet. But in the background is directly due north on the cardinal direction through this doorway. There's a little platform and a marker stone, is the peak Veronica, which is centered by this doorway and directly due north of the site. So we think that this was one of the things to view Veronica. And now we're getting way inside. Steve, stand up. This is Steve Laswell from Silver Cliff, has gone with me on many of these expeditions, and so that's Steve right there below a 20,000 foot peak. We've had some horrendous times in thick cloud forest, mud and rain, and you name it. So finding it's not an easy task getting on top of these peaks. And this ridge is a ridge that runs up from Machu Picchu. And we found an immense ceremonial site up there, which we think was the final pilgrimage destination of pilgrimages coming up through Machu Picchu. So, and it still needs more exploration. And this is going over a 16,000 foot pass to get there. You can see the glacier in the background. That shows you the retreat of glaciers in Peru. This is probably 2019. You see all this smooth rock here. That was glacier not too many years ago. We're following an old Inca road. And this is the site that we most recently worked at. And there's our diagram of it. It's quite complex. You can see it on top of the mountain there. And it had replica stones, and we haven't done enough work there to establish what they were replicas of. We tried to get up there last year, and we got into torrential rains. We didn't make it. So that was a failure. Anyway, there's the picture, and there's Steve again, and my Peruvian partner Edwin, and our crew. And this is a little slide that I always throw in just to give credit to all the people that have been so helpful and made all this thing work. And the upper left-hand corner is a good friend who lives in Peru, and he was one of the builders of the modern Machu Picchu Railroad. And the fellow with binoculars is probably the world's authority on high Andean birds, Barry Walker, and he just retired as British consul in Cusco. And then Hugh Thompson in the center with a book, and Tom Zeidema, and my Australian friend over here, and Edwin Duenas in the center, and the fellow here in the center is John Hemming, and he's probably the world's authority on the conquest of the Inca. He wrote the book, The Conquest of the Inca. And if you really want to read what happened to the Inca, it's John Hemming, and he's retired director of the Royal Geographical Society. He's in his 90s, still doing well in London. And my wife Amy on the bottom there, and Kim Melville over in the end. And this is the book that Kim and I produced. Sadly, it's our publisher, Johnson Books in Boulder, went out of business, so it's out of print. So, but I have a few copies, and if anybody would like a digital copy, it's free. And then I always throw this in that John Levers and I, we always discovered where these ruins were by asking the locals. That's it. Yes. Questions? Yes. None. What's that?
What were the temperatures?
Oh, Um, you know that Peru, we're working at 12 degrees south latitude. So it's basically just rainy season and dry season. So the temperatures are stable. So at night, on top of one of those peaks, well, down 20,000 foot peak, it's like the Himalayas. But working on those sites, it's 15, 16,000 feet. It's going to be warm in the daytime. So probably in the 60s or so. And in Machu Picchu, Machu Picchu probably stays around 70 most of the time. Every once in a while, it gets a weird weather pattern called the friaje. Cold weather comes up from Patagonia, and then it'll drop down to the 40s on rare occasions. So,
Wow. How, besides the solstices, are there any monuments that indicate the equinox?
I'm sorry, my hearing is.
Besides the monuments that indicate the solstice, are there any monuments that indicate marking the equinox?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Many of these buildings are aligned north, south, east, west, as well as the solstice is a common one. And like the Torreon and mentioned Machu Picchu, we think actually aligns at the rising of the Pleiades before a month or two before the June solstice. Yeah. So yeah, there's all kinds of, and all these little remote ceremonial sites and villages are usually laid out cardinally. So.
Did you ever get I'm trying to figure out how to ask the question, the buildings, the structure look very right angles, smooth, right angle, like a construction site would be building today. Did you ever kind of wonder how they accomplished that?
Yes,
then?
I mentioned Vince Lee, the Princeton architect, an old climbing guide. He was probably the world's authority on Inca architecture, and they reconstructed these things, and they had projects where they were actually chipping stones in the same manner, and he solved most of the mysteries. He also worked on Easter Island on big heads there to figure, but yes, so it's not a mystery. There's lots of alien theories out there. So, but Vince Lee was the man, and again, our Coloradoan.
Curious, there's some sites discovered that are not open.
Some areas not open to the public.
Right. Some of the things that you discovered.
Oh,
So.
actually, these remote areas, like anybody could go there if you could get there. But Machu Picchu is just thousands of people a day, and and you have to walk a little line and get out of the way of people taking selfies, and you can't go anywhere other than just their little track. But except for the big tourist sites, you can go anywhere in Peru. Yeah, if you can get there. If you can get there, yeah. Okay. Thank you.